Thank you all for being here. I'm very excited to moderate this CRO panel session. And I'll start by saying I'm not an actuary, so this is very exciting for me to be here at the Actuary Summit. Today's session, you'll get to hear from 4 fantastic CROs who are all actuaries, and there are 3 key takeaways for you. What are the key learnings for you as an actuary in a CRO role? How does an actuary add value in a CRO role? And thirdly, how do you develop those skills needed to become a successful CRO with an actuarial background? So with that, as you listen through, make sure you provide feedback on the app. If you haven't downloaded it, please do so now. And rather than me introducing the speakers, I'm going to ask each of the CRO panellists to introduce themselves with their personal journey. How did they get to becoming a CRO? What was their journey? So I might start over with Mike.
Thanks very much indeed, and it's great to be here talking about a subject that I'm passionate about. I'm Mike Thornton, Chief Risk Officer at AIA in Australia and New Zealand, and prior to that had a long actuarial career with the AIA group prior to transitioning into CRO roles. I'll provide a bit of background as to how that transition occurred, if that's okay. Firstly, other than being a rock star, and I'd love to be a rock star, trust me, I really think the CR role is a fantastic role, given its breadth and the development opportunities and the challenges. So I'm super keen to be here and to help inspire you to take on risk roles and CRO roles. My transition was really pretty simple. Around 2006, I was the group chief actuary at the AIA at the AXA Group in Melbourne, and the AIA Group at the time was trying to develop a network of CROs around the world, and the aspirations were really quite limited at the time. They wanted somebody who knew about product pricing, who knew about capital, who knew about asset liability management. And the CEOs looking around the business as to who can do that. Well, I've got an appointed actuary who does all of that, so I got the gig. It was that simple. From an AXA perspective, the AXA Group thought of me as the Australian CRO, but internally here in Australia, I was still the group chief actuary, and I was still doing pretty much exactly the same thing. I was inspired a year or so later by Tony Coleman, who many of you will know. I was at this very conference, and at that particular year it was held in Christchurch, New Zealand, of all places, and he gave an amazing presentation on this new CRO role that he'd just taken on at IAG, the general insurance business. And inspired by this, I returned to Melbourne. Went to see my boss at the time, got my business card out and literally told him that I wanted to change the title on my business card. And that's exactly what happened about 9 months later, when I had that title and I was running the risk, the operational risk and the compliance teams, as well as running the corporate actuarial team. So a very simple transition for me at that time, and one that's allowed me to take on the role in a gradual sense to develop as the profession and risk management teams have developed, and to progressively step away from my actuarial responsibilities, which I've done over those years.
Great, thanks Mike. I might now ask Corinne if you could share your personal journey to how you got to CRO.
So similarly, I started in very traditional actuarial roles within general insurance, worked in pricing, reserving, worked with Tony Coleman at IAG. And I think that's a really important skill to learn as an actuary. I think often I see younger people trying to move around and do lots of different things, but I think getting that core skill set of understanding the business, the pricing, the reserving, is really, really important to set you up to then move into other roles. I have moved around quite a bit into different types of roles, usually being fortunate to be in big companies like IAG and Suncorp. When people get to know you and get to know your skill set, then I have found it's easier to kind of move along to the next role where you can bring the knowledge that you've got, but then continue learning. So I've done capital modelling, I've done M&A type work, which gives quite a different perspective, I think. Reinsurance, I love reinsurance because it gives you that global view rather than just the Australian view, and get to talk to people with all those different perspectives. And a bit of strategy work in reinsurance and capital and other areas as well. I have been the appointed actuary for a smaller insurer at ComInsure at CBA on the general insurance side. And I think there I developed quite a bit of interest in risk. We were working on the ICAP, we were working on risk appetite statements, I was attending the board risk committee, and I think that kind of developed that interest into risk. I could see how the link between risk and the actuarial skills. But also as the appointed actuary, you do have to comment on the risk management, and that's probably an area I felt like a little bit weaker in my skill set because I hadn't actually done that role. So now, having done that role at Suncorp, I do think I would be better in my next AA role because I would have a better understanding of that risk management side and that broader knowledge of the business. When I went to Suncorp, I was doing capital and reinsurance, and then a few years in, the CRO role became a vacant, so CRO of insurance. And so it seemed like a natural progression for me to move in there. I was able to bring a lot of knowledge, a lot of the relationships I already had, but then broaden my skill set. And I've learnt an awful lot in the last 2 years. I think I've learnt a lot about operational risk, system health, compliance, but being able to bring that really good understanding of the key drivers of the business, I think helps you put all of that in perspective as a CRO. And so, and I've also think that the last 2 years has been an ideal time to be in risk. There's an awful lot of focus. If you're ever going to get interest and focus from the companies and money to put in resources for compliance and risk, now is the time. So it's been good for me.
Excellent, thanks Corinne. And as the only non-APRA regulated entity, Gavin from ICAP, can you share your story?
Thanks, Anu. So yeah, not only non-APRA regulated, I'm also the token Kiwi. So I grew up in New Zealand, and I think one of the challenges for being an actuary in New Zealand is you can't study actuarial science at university. So, you know, I started work for Tower, it was Tower Life back then in 1992 in Wellington, and then had the joy of, over the next 8-9 years, working full-time and studying full-time to become a qualified actuary. So that put pay to any social life I thought I might have. And after sort of several years in life insurance, I moved to ACC, the Accident Compensation Corporation, spent 8 years there, and the last role I had there was as the chief actuary. I then moved to Australia in 2008 as the ex-Prime Minister Robert Muldoon put it, to raise the average IQ of both countries. And I worked at Allianz for a while, again in workers' compensation insurance. I then moved to Liberty and had some time in commercial lines insurance, and then 2 years at Deloitte, which just was a bit of an experiment that failed, so that's all right. Realised that consulting wasn't quite for me at that time. But at that time I was trying to work out what I was going to do next, and I actually had a recruiter ring me up and said, have you ever thought about getting into risk management? And I said, well, I have, but I'm not sure I'm ready for it. And he said, well, look, Zurich's looking for a new chief risk officer. They want someone with an actuarial background, and they want someone that can grow into the role. So it was pretty much, you know, round peg, round hole. It just sort of fit together, and so I joined Zurich, what's that, sort of 5 odd years ago now, as their chief risk officer. And that was really my sort of first foray into risk management, and I truly didn't know much about risk management at the time, but had a great team, learned a lot, and I think for me, that ability to sort of go in as someone that didn't know a lot and just challenge what was going on, and just really asking all the dumb questions, you know, why are we doing this, what's happening over here, was just brilliant. And then sort of a year and a half into that role, and so 3.5 years ago now, I had another recruiter tap me on the shoulder and said, you know, how would you like to be the CRO of the largest insurance company in Australia? and I was trying to work out who that was, and he was stretching the truth a little bit, but Insurance and Care New South Wales was established in September 2015 to bring all the insurance and care services of New South Wales Government together. So we do all of the private sector workers' comp insurance. We also provide the services to the Lifetime Care Scheme, which covers people who are catastrophically injured on New South Wales roads. We cover the dust diseases care, predominantly people with asbestos-related illnesses. And we also have the Treasury Managed Fund, which is an insurance captive, insuring all of the New South Wales government agencies for property, liability, cyber security, all the rest of it. So we insure everything from public schools and hospitals to the Opera House and the Harbour Bridge. Yeah, keeps me busy. I have 7 different teams reporting to me, so not only a risk team, but compliance, audit, legal, company secretary, and a few other bits and pieces I can't remember. But I think for me, the joy that I think, but like Mike, getting into risk management just brought in a new lease of life. And I think, as an actuary, I got to see a lot across the various organisations I worked for. But I think as a CRO, it just takes it to another level. I can be talking to anybody from the receptionist on the front desk about physical security through to the chairman of the board about, all things capital and Royal Commission related issues. And side to side from the quantitative, actuarial and financial aspects of the business through to culture, risk culture and the HR related matters. So I think that's what I enjoy most about being a CRO.
Oh, that's great, Gavin, thank you. And finally to Greg, if you could share your story on how you got to CRO.
Thanks, Anu. Yeah, I've got a really short answer, a middle answer and a long answer. So the short answer was, after 17 years of being a consultant with an actuarial consulting firm and having done 10 appointed actuary roles and all the rest of it, and was looking for some new challenges, Clearview sort of, I don't know, it's not a startup, but maybe it's a restart-up, if that's the right language, back in 2010. Had sort of kicked off, and they'd approached me to be the appointed actuary while I was still a consultant. But I looked at it and they were looking for a chief risk officer. And I went, well, I've got 4 appointed actuary roles now. I've got a few audit clients and I do all this other stuff for M&A work. I couldn't just do the AA work, so I said I'll put my hand up for both. And that was about it. So that was my journey. Boom, there. A little bit more seriously though, my history before that though is basically in the 2000s, I was quite involved in really trying to build the whole momentum within the profession, if you like, to try and expand the role of actuaries into CROs, and spent quite a bit of time, speaking at conferences in Australia and overseas around ERM and how the profession, could be involved in that, what the merits of ERM was, because back in those days you even had to tell people what it meant, and all the things, and helping other people like, people may know Fred Rowley, who was very instrumental in sort of converting what was the CIRA designation in the States becoming a global thing, and that actually happened when I was president. So I think I let Fred sign it because he's done so much work on the treaty, but basically pushing it through. So there's a long history, I suppose, in my career around just trying to get the profession into it. So when this came up, it was a case of course I can do it. Now that I've got it, what do I do? But it was a little bit of fun. Journey since then has probably been quite interesting, because Clearview, when I first joined it, was mainly a restart up, primarily a life insurer, had a little bit of wealth business and a small financial planning business. Of course, these days it's got 2 advice businesses. It has a platform and runs a life business. It's done all sorts of things. We've opened and shut businesses, which last time people maybe saw me wear my red glasses was in a witness box talking about that. But interesting, that has, when I started, it was, I think, Mike, you talked about, actuaries doing risk, and it was about capital management and asset liability management. That was mainly the sort of stuff that I started on. Since then, I've employed an appointed actuary who reports to me and looks after all the actuarial and a lot of the finance stuff, financial risk within the life company. I spend all my time now on non-financial risks, from the advice business through the platform, operational risks, outsourcing risks. I've been to a lot of sessions here where we talk to, tech, where you have an integration layer and you plug all these things in left, right and centre. I worry about the surface of cyber risk that we've got out there in the marketplace. Culture, I think Gavin, you just talked about that, and strategic risk. So it's actually interesting that what started as a job that was, I needed 2 jobs to keep me entertained as a former consultant. I'm actually about to split my job because I can't do all of what I'm doing now. So we're actually in the market at Clearview to get a serious CRO. So anybody who's really keen. No, but it's just become so big now, and for me, the CRO role is sort of now becoming not just CRO. It's there's this whole sort of area around regulatory affairs, regulatory management, compliance, which is a whole universe of stuff that for a senior executive, it's sort of there's a whole bundle of stuff there that now has to be done.
That's very true. So if we take Greg's open advertisement here for a risk role at Clearview, if any of you are sitting there as an actuary going, well, what am I going to learn? Why should I apply? I'm going to throw this to Mike in terms of any of the actuaries here. What can they learn and what's the growth opportunity? Because you spoke about the 4 things that you had as an actuary when you went into the risk role. So on top of that, what can the actuaries in the room learn if they go into a CRO role?
Yeah, firstly, just to comment on the core actuarial skills. I mean, there's no doubt in my case that those made me a natural CRO role 10 years ago when the role was a little narrower. It's interesting hearing Corinne talk about how in your relatively short time in the role, it's felt like a good time to be there. Because there's going to be ongoing investment. I thought that when LPS 220 came in. I knew that when the financial crisis happened and we came out of that. And following the Royal Commission, this is certainly an area where there will be ongoing investment. For me, and I'll probably be a bit controversial in a moment, which Greg will like, he likes controversy. The huge challenge and development area for me, and I think for actuaries more generally, is the people and the leadership challenge that comes with that. I increasingly find myself acting more like a management consultant than a technical risk manager. And I think the reason for that is roughly as follows, that organisations are well intended, and most organisations in a well-regulated market we have here will have solid people and processes. So what tends to go wrong is when people get involved, because people have, they can't communicate well, they don't play well together, they've got perhaps conflicting agendas, they don't get themselves organised, or they've got some bias which becomes problematic at some stage. So the challenge for me is how can I get involved in what's important for the business, the key business challenges, the key project, and how can I develop the rapport, the trust, and build influence and have impact. So that's a great challenge for people who are typically coming from a technical place, but it's also a great opportunity. The slight challenging comment I would have here is that I actually think the skills I use are stakeholder management, dealing with conflict, communication. There's a whole stack of softer skills which I'm having to use in ways I wouldn't have envisaged 15 years ago. And it turns out that the vast majority of people, I think, are actually quite poor at these skills. So is this a challenge for actuaries? Yes, it is, but there's also a fantastic opportunity, and the vast majority of people are actually quite poor at them. So I've really enjoyed challenging myself in those areas. I think the other good news here is that these aren't challenges that are just reserved for CROs. All risk teams in all industries, in all countries are being challenged to do more. Everybody's been encouraged to step up. So those opportunities are there for people in my team and in our teams. And there's a real opportunity for the people in this room to take on those challenges, those opportunities, to explore some of those softer and leadership skills and to shine. And the time is now to act and take on some of those opportunities.
Right, thank you. I've got 2 more questions just to cover the things that we spoke about at the beginning, but do start sending through questions on the SMS where you get to ask your questions. So taking on that point in terms of what actuaries can learn, that's great for you, but I'm sure you also want to contribute to the CRO role. So what is it that the actuary can add value in the CRO role compared to someone with an audit, risk, legal, compliance background? What's the uniqueness? And I'm going to ask for two perspectives here. First from Corinne yourself, and then Gavin. What is that unique value add that an actuary provides compared to others?
I think the first thing I'd say is that I think that in risk teams, it's really important to have a diverse skill set. So I don't think a risk team would be working effectively if it was all actuaries or all lawyers or all accountants. I think having a range of those skill sets is really important because it brings those different perspectives, the different ability to challenge in different ways. I think what actuaries do bring is the ability to really understand the risk trade-offs. We're trained very early on to use judgment and to be able to really trade off risks in everything we do, in the way that we're thinking, and I think it's that way of thinking that we bring. It's a very structured approach, a structured way of thinking, and I think bringing the financial understanding of how an insurance company or a financial services company works helps us get a really good perspective on things. I don't think before I became a CRO that I understood how many things go wrong in an insurance company on a day-to-day basis. And it's very easy when you suddenly get told about this has gone wrong, to really sort of almost panic. But I think having a good understanding of the key drivers, what really is going to send the company under, helps you put that perspective. And yes, we need to fix everything. And yes, we need processes and we need to get that all fixed. And I think often our judgment of how the business responds is key as well, to know when we need to step in and when we just leave the business do that. But I think that perspective of this is not going to affect the solvency of the company, this is not going to affect our ability to pay a dividend, is really important. And I think that's something actuaries do understand better than some other areas. I think we also are very good at looking at the data and forming views, and also not sometimes people will put data up to prove their point, and we all know how easy it is to make the data say what we think it should say rather than what the underlying truth is. So I think we've got that ability to challenge what gets put in front of us quite well as well. In risk, I think it's important we don't think that we're experts in everything. When we do our pure actuarial roles, we tend to think we are the expert in the room, but in risk, I think we often aren't. And I think what our role is often to challenge and to ask those stupid questions, like Gavin said, but not always to solve. And that is another difficulty when you first go in, I think, because it's very easy to go, I want to just fix this. But my role, I think, is to help the business be able to fix it so that next time they come across an issue, they know how to do it themselves rather than having to come to me to help them do that. And that is how you build the maturity of risk across the company. So yeah, they're my key benefits I think that we can bring.
Right. Gavin?
I think, as I said earlier, as an actuary, I think we get to see across the whole of the business, right from underwriting and invoicing through to claim management and the assessment of the liabilities and things, and so. The CRO, I think, for me, it gives another one of those helicopter views across the organisation. So I think moving from actuarial to risk management, the benefit was already having a reasonably strong oversight of how an insurance company operates. And not just from the operations side, but also the financials. So, being able to sit there as the CRO and actually understand when, the finance team or the actuarial team are talking about, the implications of, higher or lower return to work rates, if you're talking about workers' compensation insurance or superimposed inflation or what's happening with bond yields and just being able to, I guess, hear it, assimilate it very quickly, and then understand the consequences for the organisation, as it affects the financials. I think the other thing with actuaries, we understand and work with uncertainty and probability. For those that have ever seen a heat map, to me that's just abhorrent. It's taking what we would see as an underlying likelihood and consequence distribution or two distributions and sort of disintegrating that into one dot on a heat map. That's near enough to blasphemy. So I think just having that understanding of what might happen and the chances of it happening, and being able to use that knowledge to inform the business and the decisions it's making in particular. And I think that's where risk management is starting to go. Some organisations more than others, is that how do you inform the material decisions of an organisation? I think as an actuary we can bring a lot to that. And also in terms of the I guess actuarial techniques, a lot of companies now looking to use Monte Carlo simulations as a way to inform material decision making, and again something that actuaries are very good at. I'm reading a book at the moment called The Floor of Averages, which it's essentially saying don't get fooled into using an average of one distribution or parameter and using that in a different situation, because you will run into trouble. And again, I think as actuaries we fully understand that, but normal people don't. So that's another area I think actuaries can add value. And I think as actuaries on the softer skills side, we come with a very inquisitive mind. I think to what Corinne was saying, we will challenge what we're given. If it's a data set or someone's telling us something, rather than just blindly accepting it, we will challenge, well, where has it come from? How do we know it's accurate? Are there biases in it? So I think that inquisitive nature. And I think actuaries generally have a high level of humility, and I think that, also makes good risk managers, and that ability to get out into the organisation and just be humble about who you are and what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve. And for me as a CRO, or as anyone in the risk management practice, I don't take any risks. It's the organisation that does. And I quite like to tell the organisation that risk management is not managing the risks of the organisation, it is managing the organisation with risk in mind. And so I think just being able to have those conversations from a no vested interest, no ego level of humility, and just influencing where the organisation will go for the benefit of the organisation. So I think that's where us as actuaries can add value.
That's great. So we've heard what you can learn as an actuary going into a CRO role, the unique value you bring to it, and I think the next logical question is really, what are those skills that you need to learn? And I'd like to turn to Greg to get your perspective, please.
Well, I think the skills follow the proposition, really. I was just going to, and possibly this sort of answers this question, but also just carries on. The two other things I think, we talk a lot about CROs. We tend to, in these environments, talk about CROs and insurance, which we all are here, and our native territory, actuarial traditional work. I think other things around the profession, the skills we bring, is also just being able to get our mind around the economics of most things. In my consulting career, we did all sorts of weird stuff. But you could always start with the value chain, the economics, and from there the process, and you're sort of 3/4 of the way through anything. The numbers is really powerful on all this stuff. Yeah. The other thing I think that we all forget about in risk management, it's not also always about downside risk. Sometimes it's about giving people permission to actually take some risk and be able to articulate, look, it is only this size problem. Speed to market. Sometimes that is better to be faster to the market with something imperfect, because the cost of being late to market is too big. Which then gets me, I suppose, to the skills. What are some of the key skills? I think the numbers and the economics is stuff that, whether we're talking about insurance or anything else, we sort of pretty well have that, I think. The key part, though, is the communication skills and the soft skills and the leadership, and all that sort of stuff. It is definitely something you have to be curious, you have to be staring out the window a lot and thinking about what could go wrong. I think, I work a bit with the distribution, so I drink a lot of red wine thinking about what can go wrong. So wine drinking skills are very important. But no, seriously, it's a lot around communication and persuasive skills. And as much as Gavin hates simple heat maps, I use them to my evil purpose as much as I possibly can, because you have to communicate things to people, and that's one of the skill sets. And I think probably for actuaries, that's probably two things I think that we don't have in our profession that we learn a lot about, is the non-financial stuff, so the operational stuff, compliance and all the rest of it. I think that's a bit of a mystery for the profession. And as I said, the communication, getting complex ideas across, in a fairly powerful way, is something that I think as a profession as actuaries and risk officers, we both need to improve that quite a lot to really own the space, particularly outside our native territory of insurance.
That's great, and there's some really good questions that are coming through, so I'll go over to the questions. I think what's quite relevant here, and Greg, I'll look to you, given you mentioned that Clearview is, you're looking at splitting the role between risk and the appointed actuary. So one of the questions that's come through is, will the new CPS 320 affect the relationship between appointed actuaries and CROs? Greg, your perspective on that?
I don't know. I think at the moment, they're asking a little bit more of appointed actuaries around the risk space, but I think appointed actuaries were always doing the core financial sort of risk parts of it and capital. I don't think it will. I think, where CROs, and APRA has been a bit critical, I think, in even the DII, the Disability Income Thematic Review, saying where was the CROs. I think that's sometimes a bit like asking where was the auditor, and you go, well, was the board and the management that actually caused the problem, not the auditor. I think some of that's a little bit unfair, particularly when half the CROs are actually actuaries and did understand the numbers as well. The problem is what you call it? A prisoner's dilemma or game theory type problem with a market that's dysfunctional. I don't think so. I think it'll definitely breathe some fresh air into the appointed actuary role and give it capacity to step up and take more ownership and more direction and whatever. And as a CRO, it would be great because I'll feel more able to actually allow the appointed actuary to take more of the message around the financial risk. Although I must admit, there's always a big debate in our profession as to whether appointed actuaries are first line, second line, first and a half line. I've always seen them actually as being first line, and I know a lot of people in the audience will think I'm a heretic with that, but to my mind, they're an executive role there to advise boards and everything about actuarial management and risk management in the first line, and my job as second line is to keep an oversight of that. But I'm always going to put my effort where I think the rest of the organisation is going to be weakest and challenged there most. So it's going to be more around the operational conduct risk and all that sort of stuff. Culture is where I, as I said, spend my time now.
Great. Any other perspectives from the panel? Otherwise, we've got a number of other great questions coming through. I might then look at the second question that's come through here and look to you, Gavin. You mentioned before around the number of non-financial risks and different types of risks you see every day with the 7 teams that you look after. So the question around how are you monitoring and measuring conduct risk, and do your actuarial skills help with this?
So I think how do you monitor and measure conduct risk? I think the idea with a CRO is to make sure that you, I guess, have oversight and to Greg's point, that second line challenge of the first line in terms of what are they doing around all material risk types, and where is the uncertainty that matters. And I think with the Royal Commission, the uncertainty that mattered there was around the conduct of the organisations and the way it treated its customers. And this again was where an organisation can quite easily fall into what's called the floor of averages, where you say, well, my average, my NPS score is X, or my customer satisfaction is 8 out of 10. It's like, yeah, but what about the customers who are scoring you a 0 or a 1? So I think the monitoring is just part of it. And I mean, at iCare, we do NPS scoring of our customers, but probably more importantly, it's not just the monitor measure, it's the what do you do once you've found that something isn't going well? Because I think if all you're doing is monitoring and measuring, then all you're doing is admiring the problem. And then this is where I think risk management needs to, incite the business to actually, detect and remediate these sorts of issues. And so, making sure that people don't fall into this, feel of comfort because the average customer sat is okay. It's like, well, are you looking at the tail events, the ends of your distributions, and then what are you doing about it? Are you making it easy for your customers to complain? So at iCare, big red button on the website there that says if you would like to complain, fill in the form and send it to us, because we'd rather they complain to us and gave us the opportunity to fix it than go to ICAC or the Ombudsman or the Minister or any one of a number of external stakeholders who would then just come down on us like a ton of bricks. So I think that's what we're doing. did the actuarial skills help? I think, yes, from that, again, understanding distributions of, customer satisfactions, understanding how NPS scoring works, understanding how the business works. So yeah, I think that all helps.
Oh, that's great. And Corinne, I'll ask you the first question that's just come in there. Corinne, you mentioned around the fact that having now been a CRO and going in back to a appointed actuary role, there are some new skills that you would have taken as a CRO into that. So the question that's come through is, which area are you least comfortable with as a CRO right now?
That's a difficult question. I'll answer a bit broadly. I think as you get into more senior roles, you're never able to be really good at everything that you're responsible for. And so to me, the skill is in getting the people around you who are experts in those areas and knowing how to work with them and how to maximise their knowledge, how to ask the right questions, how to make sure that they're on top of the key things. So I think things like the risk around our distribution and the compliance risks around that, I'm no expert in that, and compliance and anti-hawking and all those things are quite complicated. And so making sure that I've got people who are managing that and that I feel comfortable with the way they're managing it, whether that's the lawyers who are involved or the compliance experts, is probably I guess my weakest area, but I feel comfortable because I know the people who are monitoring it are on top of it and that they've got the right skill sets.
Oh, that's great. It definitely was a tough question. And I think leading on to that and sort of linking into a question that's come in, Mike, to yourself, you spoke about what you've learnt coming into the CRO role. For any actuary here who's looking to take on the CRO role, how big is that challenge and what kind of advice would you give them in taking on that challenge?
I think, I think it depends what sort of challenge you're looking for. So, and I think you've got some control here, right? Most people in this room will have a pretty solid set of core actuarial skills. And will have been around the industry for long enough to know how to engage and communicate well. So a lot of the building blocks will be there. The question is probably, how much are you prepared to back yourself to step into a slightly different role, and how different is that role? There'll be ways of that gap being relatively small, and there'll be other opportunities. The Clearview CRO role, perhaps, where the step up might be a little bigger in the short term. So I mean, I think it's a question of how bold do you want to be. I would certainly encourage people to explore new roles and new opportunities. You've got nothing to lose, right? The worst that can happen is it doesn't quite plan out as you expect, but you learn something regardless, right? And you'll always have people around who are looking to help and guide you and mentor you through any challenging situations. I mean, there are inevitably times when you are being challenged with a complex business problem. There are differing views around boardrooms and exco tables, and those are challenging moments. But you can play a long game. You can seek the advice of your peers around you, and there's no end of support of people around who want to set you up for success. So I think there are great challenges and great development opportunities out there, and there are ways of managing those.
Can I add a few comments to it? I think that question depends a lot on where you are in your career, and I also think there's a big difference of when some of us guys started, or when I started. This was all pretty new stuff. Somebody had to do it, and we just grabbed it and did it. I'm not quite sure that's quite the same today. And I think for a lot of people in the audience, I think the truth is you'd probably be pretty unlikely to just step straight into a CRO if you hadn't been working in the risk space for a while now. And I think my recommendation to anybody who you need to want to actually have a serious go at a career that is sort of a risk management career, because I think it's actually becoming almost a semi-profession in its own right now.
Yeah.
And so I think it's getting into a risk team and coming up through there now. I think it'd be quite hard. The only other one would be somebody who's been a veteran in an industry and knows the whole end-to-end thing could step across, but even then you probably have to be a voracious reader around technology and all the rest of it just to keep up to speed with how exactly what this week's cloud computing theories are and all the rest of it. Anyway,
No, that's great. And given we're just at the last question, so before we wrap up, so the theme of the Actuary Summit is time to act. So you've heard about what you can learn, the unique value you can bring into a CRO role, the kind of skills you need to learn and can learn. I think the big question then is, and I know, Greg, when I got to interview you as part of this panel session, you're very passionate about how do we drive the profession forward. So I'm going to finish with you, Greg, and ask for your view on what can the Institute do and what else should they be doing?
Well, I have a personal view that for the last few years we've had quite a few sessions like this, which is talking about almost educating people about CROs and getting into it. I don't necessarily see a lot as a profession we're doing, and by the way, I'm not saying anybody else is doing this particularly well, but actually doing hard research and papers and things on how you actually do stuff. For example, you were just asked a minute ago, Gavin, around conduct risk. Okay, we're talking about monitoring and all the rest of it. Is there a paper, an actuary has written a paper on what exactly do you do as in a risk team to actually build a risk process or managing process around conduct risk, for example. We've had a whole bunch of papers around sequencing risk and investments and all sorts of stuff here today. It's all got modelling and everything else. We haven't really got a lot of hard science that says we own this territory. To my mind, as a profession, I think we're actually at the point now we need to take the next step, that we actually need to have textbooks that don't talk about the value of risk management, but actually more componentised. We have a raging debate here about, this technique works or doesn't work around risk management, and particularly outside the financial risk into operational risk in particular. That's just I'm not quite sure what that looks like, but that to my mind is where we need to actually get to, so that people say, oh, this is the actuarial technique for this risk type thing. You know what I mean? We don't have a label on it.
Great. Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking the panel members, Corinne, Greg, Gavin and Mike.